16th and 17th centuries, do you think treatment of noble and poor prisoners was the same?
No.
This is, of course, before the French Revolution. Thank you. It wasn't. And in fact, in that period, noblemen like Don Nicolás Martín Ramírez de Zúñiga
Are you making the film? Yeah. I hope I have enough.
You had noblemen like Don Nicolás Martín Ramírez de Zúñiga. Where do you think he would be lodged in this jail? Where would he stay? Where would his cell be? A room with a view, very well said, actually. Where exactly? Here's the jail? He would be in one of the two towers, exactly. A nobleman, in fact, it was very rare for a nobleman like Don Nicolás to end up in jail. Very rare. And in fact, at the beginning, when King Philip IV built this, only people who had committed murder, crimes of blood, or crimes against the monarchy were put in this jail. But soon afterwards, they started admitting all types of prisoners.
Admitting, I like.
So, if he were in this jail, he'd be up in the tower. He would be allowed to bring in all of his furniture from home. His wife could spend the night with him, if you wish. Lucky you. He could hold banquets, business meetings. He could receive other noblemen. He could basically do everything he did outside of the jail without leaving the jail. So, you're fine. Just, I would like to ask you, just to show how much of a nobleman he is, to offer the citizens of Madrid and visitors a reverence, which involves putting your left foot behind your right, taking your hat with your right hand, and offering a reverence to our...
Can you do it?
Yes. No. Put your left foot behind your right, put your hat on, and with an elegant gesture, you offer us a reverence.
Oh, much better.
Give him a bit of applause, come on.
Yeah.
Now. That's our noble. You can continue to be a nobleman. Bob.
Quanto è bello quel ragazzo. Easy yours. Yeah.
Poor Bob. Bob is going to be what we called in the 16th and 17th centuries in Spanish would be un villano, which means an inhabitant of the villa. In English, you could call him a peasant. But his name really doesn't matter. For all intents and purposes of this demonstration, if Bob belongs to the lower classes, nobody knows his name. Who cares? He's going to be that guy. We'll call him that. That guy.
That guy. I think I'm running.
I would ask Bob to salute you, but a person from the lower classes does not know how to salute. So there you go. Now, if Bob were placed in this jail, where would Bob be?
Downstairs.
The worst place.
The basement.
In the basement, in the cellar. And you can see, if you take a look, 4 windows. Those 4 windows are the sidewalk level. Those 4 windows are the basement. That is all the light that guy would see. And in addition to being in the worst place of the jail, where unfortunately many died, he had no medicine, little or no clothing, just the clothes he had when he went into the jail. Very little food. The only food he would get would be thanks to citizens of Madrid who left donations in 2 boxes on the corners of the building. But you know, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't all that bad, because that guy, 2 days of the year, on Holy Thursday and Good Friday, during Easter week, he could take his hat, and he was allowed to put his hat on the end of a stick and stick it through the bars and ask for more. Of course, he had no protection against the other prisoners, so that might not be very useful once he got the money back in. Now I have a very unfortunate bit of information to communicate to you. Both of our prisoners have committed terrible crimes.
Oh.
They've been accused of murder.
Oh.
If these two were sentenced to death in the 16th and 17th centuries,
Would they die in the same way? No.
would they die? No, they would not die the same way. How would our nobleman, Don Nicolás Martín Ramírez de Zúñiga, how would he die?
How do you think he would die?
How do you think he would die, Don Nicolás?
Beheaded. Beheaded.
Beheaded?
Yeah.
How many of you think he would be beheaded? How many of you think he would be beheaded?
Hands up.
And those of you who don't, like you, sir, how do you think he would?
Die.
How would he die?
Hang? No, hang is the forefather.
Burned! Oh, that's a great option.
Ah, that's witch. That was
He
for
would not be
witches.
burned. Those of you who said beheaded, who are you again? Beheaded?
No, yes,
You're right.
Yeah.
He would be beheaded. Why would he be beheaded?
It was a noble way to die.
Why is it a noble way to die?
Because it's quick. It's a quick one.
Because it's quick and painless.
Yeah, it's painless.
Because he suffers less.
Yeah.
Not exactly. People in the 16th and 17th centuries were used to suffering. They are used to a lot of pain. They don't have the medicines we have today. They live in terrible conditions. There's terrible dirtiness everywhere. They had terrible sicknesses. You had the Black Plague on every corner. But he would be beheaded to save his honor.
Ah.
That is the #1 social value in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Honor.
Not the pain,
Okay.
but if somebody were to see him suffer, that would be dishonorable.
All right.
So the faster the death, the least dishonor. Now Bob.
Bob. What would happen?
Bob. How would Bob be put to death?
Hang.
No, you're not. Burning is for heretics.
Hang. Hang it.
Hanging.
Hang.
As
Yeah.
it is known in Spanish, la enfermedad del cordel. It's called the rope sickness in Spanish. Right. He would be hung, and it was a terrible death, Bob. He would probably suffer agonizing for about 15 minutes.
Oh.
Sometimes it took 15, 20 minutes for him to finally die. It would be a terrible death, very dishonorable. All of his neighbors and family and friends would see that happen.
And enemies as well.
For the middle classes, there was also something called the vile garrote. It's a French invention. Have you ever heard of it? The vile garrote. Garroteville.
Ah, yeah.
Garroteville.
Yes.
What's your name, sir?
Victor.
Victor.
He's Spanish.
What is the vile garrote?
Well, this type, they put a courier here, and with a screwdriver, they make you a
hole or
hole.
some.
They make you a hole in the neck.
Well, that was very graphically described by Victor. Thank you. Actually, it was a chair. You
Yeah.
would sit in the chair. Your neck was held
Was tied.
by an instrument. There was a hole behind your neck, and a wooden screw would be turned until you can imagine what happened. That would be for the middle classes.
All right.
Now, I'm talking about crimes that men were subjected to, because in this jail you would only find men. Don't you feel good about that? But there were also crimes for women at the time. For example, have you ever heard of adultery?
No.
Yeah.
Adultery? Never. Well, as far as the people in the 16th and 17th century was concerned, adultery was always the woman's fault. Always the woman's fault. And if a woman were accused of adultery, she would be stripped to her waist, tarred and feathered with hot, uncomfortable tar. She would be placed on a donkey. Her husband would be asked to walk behind her, tied to a rope, and he would have to wear two big wooden horns.
Horns.
Gonya. Do you have this word?
No, we have
They would have to walk around the town, La Villa, for about a day or two, and at the end, who was whipped, the woman or the man? Laura said the woman. Does anybody think the man was whipped?
No.
It was the woman. Well, actually, the man, strangely, even though it was considered the woman's fault,
It was whipped.
the man was whipped for not taking proper care of his wife. Interpret that as you will. The man did not take proper care of his wife. So as you can see, the idea of justice in the 16th and 17th century was very different. And we're going to see something different right now. Special occasions, right? Executions were special occasions, religious plays were special occasions, but every single day, what happened here?
From the husband.
Right, it was a market.
Ah, a market, yeah.
And in fact, it was a market where they spent what kind of money? Do any of you know what the money was called in the 17th century? That's before, that's about 100 years earlier. They were called ducados, ducats. And ducats look like this. I'll give you a couple. You've got 4 ducats, pass them around, take a look. These look like actual ducats from the period. And people like Shayna and Lady Claudia would come to the square to negotiate the price of the different things that they would have. And naturally, there were no price tags on anything, it was all bartering. So they would come and barter in the square. And you would find underneath the arcades, you would have people making metalwork, textiles, silks. And in the center of the square, you'd have the foodstuffs. And right where that statue is of Philip III is where people sold water. Water. Because even though Madrid has a lot of underground water, in the years following the establishment of Madrid as capital, there were not a lot of wells.
Oh.
So a lot of people had to come and buy their water here or take a very long walk down to the river. So just imagine the entire square would be full of people like Lady Claudia and Shayna, who'd be selling her wares throughout the square. Thank you very much for your participation. Alcoholic beverages. They're very, very modern church at the time.
Oh, yeah.
You think they're getting? Do you think this is a church? No. What's your name? Loida. Is that the last name?
Loida.
Loida. Where are you from?
Loida, from Spain.
Loida, like the river.
No, Loida, with a D.
With D.
With a D.
Loida. Oh, okay. Well, Loida's right. Congratulations. They're waiting to get married. And in fact, they're waiting to get married at this door that you're all standing in line at.
That guy standing there.
The door has changed shape a little bit. Here it's a little more Gothic. The door was redone
Where Bob
many
is.
years ago. But that is because you're standing in front of the palace of the Archdiocese of Madrid. This entire building is the palace of the Archdiocese. And this is where people would come before they went to the church to request their marriage certificate. So, since everybody in Madrid, for about 4 centuries, had to come to this door, people said that si no pasas por la calle de la Pasa, no te casas. So you're going to see that up here. El que no pasa por la calle de la Pasa, no se casa. But fortunately, everybody but you four, all of you are getting married. Congratulations. And I will tell you about that in just a minute. Do any of you do high-risk sports? Do any of you parachute jumping? Parachute jumping?
Bungee jumping.
Bridge jumping? Bungee jumping? I'm sorry? Teaching. Does anybody hunt for elephants in Botswana?
It is not for us.
Now, in this very placid, calm place, people practice the most dangerous sport of the period, which is documented. I'm not making this up. But first, let me tell you, you are standing in the garden of the convent of, no, it wasn't fencing. The garden of the convent of the Church of the Sacrament. And you can barely see the roof over here, beyond the trees. There's a roof. That's a building that was built by the first Duke of Uceda. He was a close confidant of the king who built the main square, King Philip III. And he wanted a place to put some female relatives of his. So he decided to build a convent right next to his palace, which you will see as we come out of this. And he'd have that way, he'd have his relatives right next to him. And he built this in 1615. It is conviction. But in the 16th and 17th century, It was almost like a jail, unfortunately. Because if you had a daughter, and your daughter had to stay pure until marriage, she'd go to a convent. If you had a sister who was a troublemaker, the way to end her trouble would be to put her in a convent. If a woman were a prostitute, she would go to a convent. So as you can imagine, convents were a solution, you might say, for society at the time to deal with a lot of women. And many women were in convents, they did not want to be there. Mothers-in-law, actually, I'm sure there are many cases. There are many cases of inconvenient family members being placed in convents. And so that is how the most dangerous sport of the period
jumping and
appeared.
going.
Since there were so many women in convents at the time who did not want to be in the convent, oftentimes young men, like this gentleman. What's your name? Guzman, come here please. Young men like Guzman, you're going to need this at night to cover yourself up. So you should. I'm sorry? I am positive. Young men like Guzman would come and they would hang out around the convent and they would practice the sport, which in Spanish was called galantear a una monja. Which means to seduce a nun. I'm not inventing this. This is in all the. This is actually like a situation comedy of the period. You would find it in Tirso de Molina's comedies. You'd find it in Lope de Vega's comedies. In theater, people would go and laugh at how people were portrayed seducing nuns. But of course, to seduce a nun, I need a nun. Like you, for example. Maria, right? Come this way, please. Are you good actors? Well, now's your chance to be one.
But we have actors here. We have actors.
Oh, let me tie this so it doesn't fall off. There you go. Lovely. Now what we are going to see is how Don Guzman and Lady Maria are going to recreate for you in 3 stages exactly what Lope de Vega, the greatest Spanish playwright, described was the way to seduce a nun. Are you ready to seduce her? Get ready. Get ready. In the first stage, our gentlemen would come to Mass at any church. He would be at Mass. They'd both be praying, please. You're praying.
You pray, Maria.
Pray. Thank you. They're both praying at church. And of course, the nuns were separated from the common people by a lattice, una celosía. There was a lattice here, right, with little holes in it, so that the nuns could see out, the common people could see in. And in the first stage of seducing a nun, our gentleman is going to look through the holes, and then he is going to lay his eyes on Sister Maria. And then we will see an explosion of passion in his face. This is the first stage. Go. Ready, set, make it last. Go. Ready, set, go. You look at her. Primero le tienes que mirar. Y luego quiero ver la explosión de pasión. Venga, pasión, hombre. Pero quiero ver una cara de haber descubierto la flor más bella que has visto jamás en tu vida. I want you to be seeing the most beautiful flower you've ever seen in your life. Ready, set, go. Give me one passionate glance. There it is. I saw it was just a moment. It was very brief. In the next stage, according to Lope de Vega, in the next stage, are you ready for this? I have a banana, but it's not a banana, don't worry. Ah, here it is. in the next stage, he would come with some ducats, and he would pay me, the doorman of the convent.
Ah, yeah,
Here
the
you go.
doorman.
He would pay me a bribe, un soborno. Right? You give me a bribe. Give me a bribe, thank you. And in exchange for this bribe,
He will give him
I
a
would
kiss.
take his love letters and hand them to Sister Maria. Sister
Take the
Maria, could you
letters.
read us the first of his love letters, please?
Will you
What does he say to you in his love letter?
try to imagine?
Oh, yes, you do. It's written right here. Hello.
Go on.
I'm Guzman, and what does Guzman say? Can't you read? It says, I cannot live anymore without
Found
you.
you.
Sister Maria, every time I go to bed, I think of you. Every time I wake up, I think of you. I can't keep my eyes, my mind off of you. Can't you read that? That's basically what he would write to her. And in the final stage of galantear una monja, he would come back to the convent. Here you go. He would give the doorman another bribe. Thank you. And I would conveniently leave the door to the convent garden at night open.
Open.
Which is where we have an expression in Spanish. Those Spaniards, are you familiar with llevarle a uno al huerto? That's where it comes from, actually. We have the translation is taking someone to the garden. If you take them to the garden, you can imagine where you're taking them, what you're doing with them. So there's this expression from the 17th century, llevarle a uno al huerto. That's what Guzman is doing with Sister Maria. And so what would happen after he gave me the bribe? I would leave conveniently. It was very dark here, there was no light. And they would both come and have a seat. There you go, let me get this out of the way.
Have a seat, have a seat.
And they would have an opportunity to get to know each other better. Well, you can imagine it.
No,
We're not
yeah.
going to ask them. And this had one of three outcomes. If there was passion between them, no. On here.
Álvaro, don't
Usually
cheat.
the lady of the house would go into a corner of the house where she had a bucket, un cubo. She would take off the lid of the cubo. And what was in that bucket? Well, you had chicken bones from lunch, you had human excrement, residual liquids, everything you can imagine, because there were no toilets in the house. It was in the bucket. She would take the bucket, go to her balcony,
And throw it
and what
down.
would she cry before 11 o'clock?
Agua
Right, in Spanish, she would say,
Agua
agua,
va.
which meant the water's going. Right? I said I'd share this with you. So she would throw this out, and so men on the street, and you can see this in paintings of the period, they would cover themselves up. They'd have a big hat, and this was to protect themselves from what was falling out of the balconies. We're safe now. They also counted on the Italian, for those Italians here. Who's Italian here? Well, you had, thank you, because your sculptor, Pedro Tacca, who's very famous, he contributed to making this sculpture as well. There was also another Spaniard, Martinez Montañez, who contributed to it because the king didn't like what Velázquez did at the beginning. He said, scrap that, start over. Right after they'd spent I don't know how much money on it, he said, well, do another one. The king didn't like the way he looked. But finally, to resolve the problem of getting the statue to stand on its hind legs, they had to consult with who was Europe's most famous thinker in the 17th century, in addition to being a mathematician. And he was Italian. Thank you, Italy.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Who is your most famous thinker of the 17th century? My
Leonardo.
Italian friends.
Da Vinci.
You've only got 2 or 3 really famous Italians from the 17th century. Who are they?
I guess.
From the late 16th, early 17th.
No, don't worry, don't worry.
You have, I'm sure you've heard of Galileo. Da Vinci's 100 years earlier. Right? Da Vinci would invent his Renaissance.
Sorry.
But Galileo is the beginning of the Baroque period. And Galileo suggested, how do you think he resolved the problem, your Italian ancestor, of making this statue stand on two legs? What did he recommend? It seems so obvious to us today, but back then they did not know about basic physics. So it didn't occur to them to do this. What would you do to make it stand on its two legs?
What would you do?
Nobody. Well, they made the back end solid and the front part hollow. So all of the weight is
Stands on the back.
statue. That was the brilliant idea that Galileo had for King Philip IV. And thanks to him, we have this wonderful statue you can't see because of the scaffolding. But I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Italy, for your contribution.